All right, so we are privileged today to have two people who work in our denomination who are intimately familiar with what's going on in the world. The first is Luciano Kovacs. Luciano, and I'm going to say this Luciano because I think today is his first day, or maybe tomorrow is the first day, has been the coordinator for the Middle East and Europe for PCUSA. And his title is changing as of either today or tomorrow to Global Engagement Coordinator. And so he is responsible for our kind of activities with partners in the Middle East, and will be speaking to us specifically about the actions that took place at General Assembly last year as they relate to Gaza and Israel and Christian nationalism. And then sharing with us whatever other observations, updates he would like to find to offer. And then the other person we have with us today is Catherine Gordon. And Catherine is with the PCUSA Office of Public Witness. Her responsibilities are predominantly in the international area, but obviously she can speak to what's going on here domestically as well. And as you know, we have been getting questions on staff from people about how we can be more engaged, how we can be better advocates. We thought we could share these resources with you and invite Luciano and Catherine to be with here today, predominantly to help give us all some resources and tools in our hands to be better advocates for peace in our world. All right, Luciano, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you for having us this morning or this afternoon. It's a privilege to be speaking to you. I wish I were there in person. It's always easier and better to be with people rather than talking through a screen. But technology also allows us this amazing opportunity. So let me start by saying that I'm going to be focusing today's presentation on four of the overtures, the resolutions that the Presbyterian Church General Assemblies have passed in the last two General Assemblies. But I will be mostly focusing on two, those that were voted overwhelmingly in favor at the General Assembly in Utah last July. The policies of the General Assembly are the documents. The resolutions that are passed at the General Assembly are the policies, the official policies of the PCUSA, which allow us to address the concerns that are delineated in these overtures, and they allow us to speak on behalf of the PCUSA on these policies. The first one that I will be referring to is the policy on confessing our complicity in Christian Zionism. The second one will be our policy on divesting from governmental debt held by countries maintaining a prolonged military occupation. And the third one is the educational resources for seeking ways to end Israeli apartheid. These were the three overtures passed at the General Assembly last year. And the three of them in some ways are follow-up to policies that had already been passed in previous years. And I will be going into details as I present. And then if we have time, because I'm aware I only have 20 minutes to present. I will also be talking about three other resolutions that had been passed at General Assembly, at the previous General Assembly. One on calling for an ending to the siege of Gaza and collective punishment of innocent Palestinian and Israeli citizens. Then one on designating May 15th as the Palestinian Nakba Remembrance Day. And then finally, a resolution on Jerusalem, three faiths, two people, and one human family. And this had been presented to the General Assembly by the Advisory Committee on Social Witness Policy. So let me start with the overture and our policy on confessing our complicity in Christian Zionism. This will also help me outline a little bit about how Christian Zionism relates to Christian nationalism and the work that the PCUSA has been doing and continues to do and will do on confronting both phenomena. So part of my role as area coordinator for the Middle East and Europe until now, and global engagement liaison in this new capacity, is to, as Jane was saying, is to relate to partners in the Middle East and Europe. And one of the processes that I've been involved in on behalf of the Presbyterian Church is connecting with global partners that are active on the topic of confronting Christian Zionism. Back in January of this year, I was in Jordan. I was invited by one of our main Palestinian Christian partners, Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb, who is the founder and president of Dar al-Kalima University in Bethlehem. And this conference I was invited to in Jordan, actually at the baptism site in Bethany beyond the Jordan, which is an archaeological World Heritage Site on the east bank of the Jordan River, was an international conference on understanding Christian Zionism and its effects on Christians in the Middle East. And at that conference, I was able to present the policies, the position, and the work that PCUSA does on this particular issue. And I opened my remarks by stating our policy, which says rejecting Christian Zionism in all its forms. This was actually how the General Assembly resolution passed in 2024 began. And you may know that that document came exactly 20 years after the first overture on this topic, which had become official policy of the Presbyterian Church USA. In the original statement, the message that had been sent to constituents, US elected officials, and society in general was already very clear, and it read, and I quote, "Christian Zionism does not represent the majority of American Christians and the faith of the Presbyterian Church USA." Now, Whether the first part of the statement still rings true is up for debate, given the current political situation in the U.S., but also because of the links between Christian nationalism and many of those who are in power, and also the political base. However, the second half of the statement still holds, because Christian Zionism and the passage of the resolution confirmed that Christian Zionism does not represent the faith of the Presbyterian Church USA. And the passage of the resolution not only refutes Christian Zionism as a theology, or pseudo theology, but confesses complicity with it. So in the original version made connections between a biblical interpretation contrary to the Reformed tradition, based on the rule of love for God and neighbor and the plight of Palestinians under occupation. And the newly approved policy denounces the expansion of Christian Zionism, as well as its ramification in global geopolitics.
Luciano, could you maybe provide us a quick definition of Christian Zionism? This is Jane.
Yeah, I'm definitely coming to that. The first definition, this is included in the resolution, is how Christianity implicitly and sometimes explicitly links the state of Israel to biblical views of Scripture's promised land. So Christian Zionism is basically the idea that the current state of Israel is the same as the biblical people of Israel, and the support of Christians to this idea. And then I'm going to be talking about a bit later the soft Christian Zionism and the hard Christian Zionism. And then the second piece is how the global spread and the adoption of Christian Zionism basically focuses on the state of Israel as the biblical kingdom. And then there's a third piece to the resolution, which talks about the understanding of how Israel can be defined as a settler colonial state and project with reference to the doctrine of discovery. And this is how Christians in many parts of the world are often complicit, although sometimes unaware of the connections between settler colonialism and Christian Zionism. And let me talk about the connection with the doctrine of discovery, which the PCUSA repudiated in 2016 and also confessed complicity in its implementation over the centuries. The doctrine of discovery, as you may know, was articulated by Pope Nicholas V as the papal bull Dum Diversas, in which he recognized the Portuguese king's new territorial conquests of the Atlantic coast of Africa. And so the doctrine of discovery was handed down up until modern times. And so the PCUSA has committed to rejecting any theological and political ideology that, quoting, justifies taking land and displacing indigenous peoples, and points to a biblical theology based on the Ten Commandments and is consistent with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As we know, the doctrine of discovery laid the groundwork for the genocide of indigenous peoples around the world, the colonization of Africa, Asia, Australia, the Pacific Islands, and the Americas. And it also led to the transatlantic trafficking of persons used as slave labor. And so one of the things that I wanted to mention this morning is, and this links our work on justice in Palestine and Israel, confronting Christian Zionism, and also confronting the doctrine of discovery and our past involvement in slavery and the genocide of the indigenous people. The PCUSA a couple of years ago opened an office of repairs of historic harms, which has the role of promoting within the PCUSA an understanding of how the church has played, the role that the church has played in creating transgenerational harm and perpetuating injustice, as well as acknowledging our complicity and responsibility in past actions and inactions, but also to pave the way for healing, reconciliation, and positive changes in our communities. So this is important to be mentioned because both these policies and the opening of this office in the PCUSA relate to the need for us to acknowledge our complicity with what has been in the past and sometimes continues in the present. As far as Christian Zionism is concerned, the continuation of oppression of Palestinian people, but also the fact that Israeli people will not live in peace, and as we saw on October 7th, until this situation is resolved. And as far as the doctrine of discovery and Christian nationalism, the continuous racism that pervades our societies. The work that we do as PCUSA to promote and to implement the policies, especially in terms of confronting Christian Zionism, is we set up a working group. Actually, Catherine is also part of that working group, and we will be organizing a conference in the US, as well as two global conferences, one in Asia, one in Africa. This will be with our partners. We planned a conference in Chile and South America a couple of years ago, and this is mandated by the overtures, the General Assembly overtures, because it is important that we look at how the expansion of Christian Zionism is not only a phenomenon in the US, but also globally. We also planned some webinars, and I encourage you to watch these webinars. They are on YouTube, because we invited a variety of speakers, both Christian and Jewish speakers, to talk about this topic. And all the speakers have outlined how the Christian Zionist ideology contributes to the violence against Palestinian people and also the consequences of settler colonialism. So I was sharing earlier that there are two different types of Christian Zionism, sort of a soft and a hard one. The most radical version of Christian Zionism justifies the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, but also is intrinsically anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish, because according to the beliefs of hardcore Christian Zionism, after the coming of Armageddon that will wipe out the Arabs and the Muslims, Jews will have to convert or perish at the second coming of Jesus. So this is, what is being considered the hardcore Christian Zionist ideology. But there's also a softer version in which Christians emotionally identify with the biblical sites of the Holy Land. And again, this explicitly this is an explicit identification with the biblical Israel, with the modern state of Israel. And this has nefarious consequences on indigenous Palestinian population that are condemned to disappear if we are not going to change the course of the situation. One of the important things that I wanted to mention this morning is that the PCUSA is doing this work in solidarity with our Palestinian partners and in cooperation with those who are already doing the work. Last September, we gathered some of our Palestinian and global partners in Dublin. Catherine was also part of that delegation. And we looked at what the PCUSA's stances on Christian Zionism and Palestinian justice are and what our partners are saying. And then we created a 2-page resource which describes historical points, theological arguments, debunking Christian Zionism, as well as correlation to the doctrine of discovery. And I think that document is on your website, and I urge you to take a look, because that's a very good resource that can be used as a congregational study document. So we really wanted to put together these small but comprehensive resource that could be used at the grassroots level. Then let me get to the other overture, the one on divesting from governmental debt held by countries maintaining a prolonged military occupation. So this overture actually calls upon both the Presbyterian Foundation and the Board of Pensions of the PCUSA to divest from governmental debt held by countries that have a prolonged military occupation, and also not to reinvest in governmental debt of each of these countries until the United Nations determines that their military occupations have ended. The same resolution also calls upon the Committee on Mission Responsibility through Investment, MRTI, to examine the feasibility of developing a mechanism to establish and maintain the list of countries whose governmental debt would be impacted by the resolution. And the three countries that were identified in the overtures were Israel, Morocco, and Turkey. As we know, Israel has occupied militarily Palestinian territory since 1967. Turkey has occupied northern Cyprus since 1974, and Morocco has occupied Western Sahara since 1976. And the way that international law defines territory as occupied is when it is actually placed under the authority of a hostile army. The third resolution that was passed at the General Assembly of last year was to promote educational resources for seeking ways to end Israeli apartheid. The PCUSA had already passed a resolution defining the laws and practices of the Israeli state as apartheid. And then this resolution, the resolution that was passed at General Assembly last year was basically a way to urging members, congregations, presbyteries to seek ways to study what it means, for Israel to be an apartheid state. So including equipping Presbyterians with the knowledge of the Israeli laws and policies that constitute apartheid. And so this is, part of our role as staff is to help congregations like yours to receive these documents and to provide educational opportunities such as this one. And it is important to understand, how apartheid occurs. First of all, it has occurred throughout history, and there are legal definitions as to what constitutes apartheid. We know that this was the case in South Africa, but anyways, so the legal definitions were set forth by the United Nations Convention on Apartheid in 1973, as well as the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court of 1993, and how the General Assembly of the PCUSA defined apartheid in the overture of the previous General Assembly was defined as inhuman acts committed for the purpose of establishing and maintaining domination by one racial group of persons over any other racial group of persons and systematically oppressing them. And this occurs in Israel and Palestine through the establishment of two sets of laws, one for Israelis and one for Palestinians, the expropriation of Palestinian land and water for Jewish-only settlements, denying the right to freedom of residence to Palestinians, dividing the population along racial lines by the creation of separate reserves and ghettos for the Palestinians, and denying Palestinians the right of a nationality. I'm going to stop here because my 20 minutes have passed. I think that Catherine will come after me and she will have more information. And then if we have time, I can delve into more And if you have questions, I'm here to answer them.
So just to give you a little bit of background, my background, I've been working on Israel-Palestine for over 20 years. I discovered the issue as a seminary student. In my internship, I was deciding whether to go to Argentina or Israel-Palestine, and I had studied political science as an undergrad, and I was like, oh, this would be interesting, politics, religion. And it really changed my life being on the ground there. I was there in 98, 99. It made me realize the importance of advocacy and advocacy within the church, and seeing how little lack of understanding of the conflict in the United States. So I've been on the board of Churches for Middle East Peace for over 20 years, and I also served on the World Council of Churches Palestine-Israel Ecumenical Forum, been on many delegations over the years to the region and to Israel-Palestine. Okay, so this picture it epitomizes the sort of absence and presence of the Israel-Palestine conflict. My father was a pastor in Charlottesville, and a young Palestinian artist was traveling through and needed a place to show his art. And my father offered the fellowship hall for him to show his art, and he gave him this picture as a gift. And I didn't realize this until I had been over there. And this picture had been in my family for 30 years. And it's by Kamal Bulata, who's one of the most famous Palestinian artists right now, and wrote a history of Palestinian art. So this picture was in my family for 30 years without me even realizing anything about the conflict. So I thought for my presentation, I'm just going to go through a brief description of what the Office of Public Witness does, how we do our advocacy, and then the main points that we are advocating on right now. So the Presbyterian Office of Public Witness is the public policy information advocacy office of the General Assembly, and our task is to advocate and help the church to advocate the social witness perspectives and policies of the General Assembly. And the church has a long history of applying these biblical and theological based insights to issues that affect the public, maintaining a public policy ministry in the nation's capital since 1946. And if you look at the top picture, that's Jimmy Hawkins, our director, myself, Christina Cosby, who's our domestic person, and Ivy Lopedito, who does outreach to constituents and young adults. And that's one of our protests that we participated in. So we're a small office, as you can see. And so the way that we work is through coalition. The main coalition that we work on Israel-Palestine with is Churches for Middle East Peace. And that is a coalition of over 30 different denominations. The picture up in the left-hand corner is a meeting we had with Representative Cori Bush, who introduced the Ceasefire Now coalition. And you can see our interim stated clerk also participated, the Quakers, the UCC, the American Friends Service Committee, the Maryknolls, the Catholics. Below the left-hand corner is our meeting with the International Religious Freedom, the Ambassador for International Religious Freedom. And then this was a picture taken after we participated in a meeting with the White House, with the National Security Council and other staff. These were all with the Biden administration. And then below in the right-hand corner, you can see this was a protest when Netanyahu came last year with our Ceasefire Now coalition. And that is the other coalition that we work with in Washington, D.C. These are the ecumenical principles that the mainline denominations, Catholic orders, some of the evangelical churches have come together to advocate on Israel-Palestine. So pursue a just and durable resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, pursue an end to the Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, recognize settlements as illegal and an impediment to peace, and ensure accountability, promote a shared Jerusalem by Palestinians and Israelis, recognize the religious importance of the Middle East to Jews, Christians, Muslims, and others, and protect religious freedom, promote a restorative justice, trauma healing, and multi-level peace-building efforts with a particular recognition of the contribution and role of women. In order to defend free speech and religious liberty, uphold the right of churches and organizations to find appropriate and various ways to end unjust practices and policies that violate international law, including exerting economic leverage. And this was added just recently because of some of the disagreements about using boycott, divestment sanctions. And then encourage a negotiated, just, and peaceful resolution to conflicts in the region, demilitarization, against sort of the flooding of military aid into the region, encourage the needs and rights-based development and humanitarian assistance to reduce inequality and promote human dignity, respect for human rights of all in the region, and opposing anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, and anti-Islamic actions. So that is sort of the broad principles that the ecumenical community base their advocacy on. And since the Gaza conflict, we have come together with a even broader coalition, and including NGOs, Jewish groups, Christian groups, so it's a broad, secular organizations, Amnesty International, many different organizations, and these are what we have been calling for since the Gaza conflict. Publicly call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire to prevent further loss of life, prohibit the transfer of more lethal weapons and military assistance to Israel, prioritize the protection of all civilians by urgently permitting humanitarian aid to freely enter Gaza and fully funding UNRWA, publicly call for an end to further annexation and Israeli settler violence in the West Bank, work diplomatically to support regional de-escalation across the Middle East, and urge all parties to fully respect international humanitarian law and international law in general. So the main sort of advocacy points we're working on right now, no new weapons to Israel. Since taking office, the Trump administration has approved a series of arms sales to Israel totaling more than $12 billion. And there have been introduced joint resolutions of disapproval that would block these sales. And it's been led by Bernie Sanders, Rashida Tlaib, and Representative Jayapal in the House. And this would block the offensive weapons sales that have killed thousands of civilians and aid workers and journalists in Gaza. This just so you can see in terms of military aid, this is the sort of the increase of aid to Israel since the October attacks. And this is from the Brown University, The Cost of War. The other advocacy point we're working on is restore UNRWA funding and stop the famine in Gaza. President Biden suspended funding to UNRWA in January of 2024. Congress then passed legislation that prohibits funding to UNRWA. And UNRWA is the main humanitarian, educational, they run all the hospitals. They're like a small country for the Palestinians. And it's to defund UNRWA is just a really tragic occurrence, especially with what's going on now. It provides education, healthcare, food, and emergency aid to millions of Palestinian refugees who have no other reliable support system. It works to help stabilize fragile communities and contributes to regional security by addressing urgent humanitarian needs. So we now have a bill in Congress called the UNRWA Funding Emergency Restoration Act of 2025, and that's Senate 890, number 898. Carson, Jayapal, Schakowsky in the House, and Senators Welsh, Sanders, Van Hollen, Klobuchar, and Hirono in the Senate are leading the charge on that. We have a huge coalition that's working on the passage of this, and the House legislation, they're still circulating it for co-sponsors before they introduce it, but it should be introduced shortly. And we have an action alert that I can give to you all so you can write your members of Congress. And then two other issues that there's not much action on to take right now, but the supporting the International Court, Criminal Court, and hold violators of human rights accountable. So in November, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav, as well as a former Hamas commander. And then the U.S. House Representatives passed, like right after they were seated, the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act, which would sanction any officials with the court or entities supporting the court who seek to investigate, arrest, or detain any U.S. citizen or citizen of an allied country. And this was specifically because of they passed this because of the warrants for the arrest of Netanyahu and Gallant. And there's also another group that's actually petitioning the court to find Anthony Blinken and President Biden guilty of supporting genocide. So on the 6th of February 2025, President Trump issued an executive order authorizing the sanctions on the International Criminal Court and its chief prosecutor, Khan. And then I'm sure you've seen the recent arrests and detainment of the student activists from the protests last year. So we are working to reject initiatives to curb free speech and advocacy for Palestinian rights. So the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act was introduced last year, and it passed the House. It didn't pass the Senate. It's been reintroduced, and this year it's HR 107, and S 558. And it threatens to censor political speech critical of Israel on college campus under the guise of addressing anti-Semitism by blurring the lines between anti-Semitism and legitimate criticism of Israel. And then the Trump administration has revoked the visas of over 300 international students for their activism on Palestine. Many have gotten messages that they should self-deport simply for Facebook posts supporting Palestinians. Additional bills were introduced last year. We have not seen them introduced this year, but we expect some sort of similar introduction, similar bills this year. And these bills allowed the Treasury Secretary to strip nonprofits of their tax-exempt status if they were found to be providing material support for terrorism. But it's a broad, very, very broad definition of material support for terrorism, and there's no due process. It's only up to the Secretary to decide this. So he could designate anyone as a supporter of terrorism. And that is very scary. The ACLU was speaking out about that too. And these photos are Mahmoud Khalil, who was a mediator during the protests at Columbia. I'm not remembering the other gentleman's name, but he's at Georgetown. He was a postdoc fellow in Georgetown for Christian Muslim relations, and he has been detained. And then a Turkish student who was a Fulbright scholar at Tufts was recently detained. There was a video circulating on social media of her being kind of kidnapped on her way to a iftar dinner. So these three have all been taken to Louisiana, and their cases are processing through the courts now. So here you can see our election center. So we have one protecting U.S. foreign assistance, and here we have our action alert to call Congress to reinstate funding to UNRWA and reject more military aid to Israel. We also have an action center where you can find your members of Congress. You can sign up for our alerts here, and it's very easy to send an email. These are the sample emails here, and it goes to your senators and representative. You can fill out your information here and just click send. And we encourage you to personalize the messages, but if you can't personalize, it still gets counted. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Catherine and Luciano. So you can see that our denomination has not been silent, has not been inactive, and we thank you, Luciano and Catherine, for your activities with regards to the issues that are on all of our hearts right now. I'd like to open this up to time for Q&A, and we can maybe take another 5 or 10 minutes if you have some. Catherine and Luciano are available to engage with us. So I'm going to bring the microphone around so they can hear your question.
Well, this is just administrative, but it would be great to have what you just showed sent to us who signed up for emails, to have that information on our screen so we can read it.
Perfect. I'm sure we can make that happen. If you could send that to me, Catherine, I can get it out to everyone. Great. Yes, Chris.
We'll put it on our interfaith. So if you go to lopc.org and search for interfaith, it'll be on our interfaith page.
Okay, great. Other questions? Yes.
Has UNRWA been able to get food into Gaza to those who need it, even if they were funded, well funded?
They have been. Right now there's a blockade. I think it's been, let me check my notes. It's been a few weeks. No humanitarian aid has entered Gaza in more than 3.5 weeks. So it goes there. It really is a collective punishment of all Palestinian people. But there was some scare. There was some fear that because Israel has said that UNRWA is a terrorist organization, and that it was, but they are still able to, they are still functioning in Gaza and the West Bank for now. But it's a very unpredictable and situation. And many UNRWA, I think that this conflict, the most UN staff people have been killed in Gaza. And I think almost 400 aid workers have been killed.
Just another question here. Have drones been considered? I'm told that they could carry as much as 50 pounds. I don't know if that's correct or not correct. But just flying drones into the area where people could just pick up foods, have them land, has that been considered?
We saw them like dropping aid in similar to those. It's just not effective. If you talk to like the humanitarian aid organizations, they need to be getting the trucks in. There is no reason why the humanitarian aid. It's against international law. The border should be open so that it's against international law to collectively punish a people and deny them electricity, water, and food. So even if we manage to get a few, drop some drones, and you could see the U.S. tried to have that dock where they were going to dock food, and this is getting around our supposed allies' policy. This is our one of our strongest allies, so we should be able to influence them. And with this administration, I think their support. They're it's sort of a lawless situation now. I don't think that they even want to get aid in to help the Gazans.
Oh, where are you going?
Oh, he's got his newspaper.
Oh.
There you go.
I was wondering what's your thoughts on the fact that there's been protests the last 2 days in a row, maybe today also, about protests against Hamas intensifies in the Gaza Strip. And they've been protesting, and God forgive, I can't imagine what's happening to the protesters by saying that they want Hamas out of there. What's your answer to that, please?
Maybe Luciano probably has more to say about this, but Hamas was not popular in Gaza. It never was. It was, after the 2006 elections, Hamas took Gaza and the Palestinian Authority took the West Bank because the U.S. did not want to accept Hamas winning the elections. And Hamas won the elections because they were campaigning against corruption. But in Gaza itself, Hamas didn't win. And the last elections they had were in 2006. So most of the kids alive today have never been have not been able to vote. So, I think the protests are understandable, given the pressure that people are under. It's really a horrific. There have been massacres after massacres and horrors after horrors on the ground there that it's really difficult to comprehend what's been happening there. So I think and the level of I think that there's a societal breakdown now because of that as well. I don't know, Luciano, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to what you just said. I think it is important for this news to be lifted up. So thank you for doing that. And that shows the importance of Palestinian people to take their any actions that they can under very difficult circumstances. So the fact that they are even able to protest in such a horrific situation they find themselves in is really a testimony to the resilience of people in Gaza who've been living in a besieged situation for 15 years, and then in this under the atrocities of the bombings since October 8th. And that also shows that in Palestinian society, there's no monolithic understanding of politics, and the fact that anything that equates people in Gaza as supporters of Hamas is just a manipulation of how a people are considered by external media and people. So yeah, people in Gaza are absolutely exhausted of the situation, and I think that not only do they see the responsibility of the Israelis, but also of the Hamas leaders.
Just as a follow-up, I was going to make one quick comment that underscores the situation. I think people in the United States, including those who have been absconded to the prison in Louisiana, have been disappeared because they have been supporting the Palestinian people. And the equation that's being drawn by our government right now is that if you support Palestinians, you're supporting Hamas, and therefore you are a terrorist. So I think the definition is being underscored by the protests over in Gaza right now, that Palestinians are not synonymous with Hamas. Palestinian people are those who are just asking for their own recognition of their sovereign state. And I think that we ought to be able to do something in the United States here to bring to bear the issue that just because Palestinians are asking for their own rights, or people in the States are asking for rights on their behalf, that they're not Hamas terrorists or any other kind of terrorists. It's freedom of speech.
Thank you, Terry.
And I would also add, and this is actually found in an article of the Times of Israel, which is a pretty conservative newspaper in Israel, but there's evidence of the fact that the Netanyahu's government has actually supported Hamas and also fed Hamas with financial aid over the years in an attempt to divide and conquer the situation in Palestine, because they didn't want Gaza to be ruled by Fatah, and so it was very convenient for Israel, for the Netanyahu's government, to support Hamas. I encourage you to read that article because that's part of the manipulation that even the Israeli government has done, only to then offer to the world the fact that all people in Gaza are Hamas supporters and terrorists, and therefore it's a justification for the massacres of more than 50,000 people.
And 50% of the people in Gaza are under the age of 18. So it's really the majority children.
So we at LOPC have a very close relationship with the local temple, and we recognize that there's a split in the temple on how they might view what's happening in Israel and Palestine. I would ask for you to comment on how, other than saying we are opposed to the government, not to the religion, how else do you finesse that when you, in your coalitions, when I assume you have Israelis, members of your coalitions?
Yeah, so we work with many, like Jewish Voice for Peace, Peace Now, which is also Americans for Peace Now. But there is, the trauma. I mean, I think there, you have to acknowledge the trauma of what happened on October 7th, and it was like the horrific trauma. But then you also have to acknowledge the trauma that's happening now, and and within our coalitions, we work with the people who are all advocating for a ceasefire. So if people aren't advocating for a ceasefire, they're not in our coalitions right now. So that's, and we might not agree on every single detail of what each organization is advocating for, but if it's the broader goal of a ceasefire and ending the occupation, ending the violence, then we can work together.
Thank you, Catherine. I'd like to thank the two of you for joining us today, for your persistence and your fortitude, and just working to make a difference on some really, really big issues in our world. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and may God bless you as you do that work.
And thanks for the work that you all are doing, and thanks for inviting us.
Thank you so much for having us. It was great to be here.
And contact your members of Congress.
I would also like to thank Chris Johnson and Terry Clark, because they are our team that has been working on this. And I'm going to give you two things that you can do that are really simple if you have been moved by anything today. First thing you can do, if you haven't yet, is go out on our website. Terry has been the master of that in terms of helping us to get things out there that are going to be helpful to you. You just go on LOPC. I think it's under ministry, the Interfaith Dialogue page. You can find there the LOPC statement on the Gaza-Israel conflict. And there are all kinds of resources there. So you can familiarize yourself with what we as a congregation have been doing. The other thing you can do, and Catherine mentioned this, is there is a huge volume of resources out on the PCUSA website. There's a link to it on our webpage. We will also, for those of you who signed up for information, we will also get that link to you. Because whether you came last week to understand how our mission partners are being impacted by the reduction in U.S. aid support, or what's going on in Gaza and Israel, our denomination has made it very simple for you to go out and look through all of the items on the Office of Public Witness. And as Catherine said, you can just type in your name, find your senators, your congresspeople, get an email out to them. You can write your own verbiage, but I've done it. It's as easy as here's my name, click, 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 gone. And I've had acknowledgement back from our congresspeople and our senators that they've received my email. So our voices count. But I just want to let you know that if you care, there are two really simple things you can do to help make your voice heard and support the work that our denomination is doing as well. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you again, Catherine and Luciano, and blessings on you and your work. And may we all go in peace. Amen.